letters sent to and from the United States under the GPU, UPU regulations 1875 to 1881. Our speaker is Jeff Bone, a retired hydrodynamicist, naval architect, who has been collecting and studying postal history for more than 50 years. He has a special interest in mails exchanged under the various French postal conventions between 1840 and 1880. And he has published more than 40 papers in this area of postal history. He has successfully exhibited at both national and international levels and has served on numerous juries and evaluation panels. Please help me welcome Jeff Bone.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, thank you, Susan. And I'd also like to thank all the organizations and support staff that has helped bring this symposium together. I know I'm very happy to be here. I'm also happy to be back in my old hometown of Bellefonte, or Belafonte, as my GPS system keeps reminding me. So anyhow, Susan said, what I'd like to talk to you today is about letters sent to and from the United States that were exchanged under the General Postal Union. And, oh, I've got the slide thing, sorry. So as a little background, delegates from 21 countries assembled at the Berne Postal Convention in October 1874. And they established rules and regulations associated with the General Postal Union. This postal treaty, oh, I'm sorry, yeah, it's hard for me to see and talk. Okay, sorry. This postal treaty went into effect on the 1st of July, 1875 for all member countries except France, which was allowed to defer the implementation of the treaty until the 1st of January, 1876. So many collectors in the classic postal history era often limit their studies, their exhibits to, oh, new attendee, to pre-GPU mails, with the feeling that once the postal rates between the two countries became unified, the study of such mails became less interesting. In some respects, this is true, but hopefully this presentation will change the minds of some of you if you think that GPU mails are, you know, kind of bland. Anyhow, in order to form a more manageable discussion, I have elected to discuss only ordinary letters sent to and from the United States. So I'm not talking about registered mail, printed matter, postal cards, secograms, whatever we learned about yesterday and today. So some of the basic principles, much of this information you've already heard in previous presentations, but I thought I'd go over it quickly with you. Okay, I'm trying to read. Okay, the General Postal Union set the rate of postage at 25 centimes or the equivalent amount in local currency. You have to remember all the members of the country may have had different currencies than the 25 centimes, which is a French-based, 5 cents in the United States, 2.5 pence in Great Britain, and so on. So their actual GPU letter rate was set such that they wouldn't have a strange rate for a single weight letter. I'm not exactly sure what the exchange rate was in Romania at the time or in Serbia, but rather than having some strange amount, like the 25 centimes in France may have been 18 3/4 bani in Romania or something like that. So rather than stick it strictly at 25 centimes. They allowed each country to change their basic rate of postage to conform more or less to the 25 centimes, although none were supposed to be greater than 25 centimes, or none were to go below 20 centimes. Also, the single letter rate was established at 15 grams. Although those countries that didn't use a metric system, like the United States, could choose the 1/2 ounce as the basic unit of weight. And another important rule was that the postage due on unpaid letters was twice the prepaid letter rate in the country of destination. So an unpaid letter sent to the United States to any of the member union countries, on arrival, the amount of postage was twice whatever the UPU rate was within that country at the time. So if it was Romania, if it was Serbia, whatever it was their UPU letter rate that was doubled. And in addition to the rates of the general UPU letter rate, there was a provision for the conveyance of sea for more than 300 nautical miles. So if a letter from any of the member country to one other member country required maritime transit of more than 300 nautical miles, an extra maritime surcharge could be added to the basic GPU letter rate. The interesting thing is that of all the original member countries, the only country that was more than 300 nautical miles from all the other members was the United States. Okay, all the other members resided in Europe or that part of the world, and the only country that was more than 300 nautical miles from all those countries was the U.S. Okay. And the other thing was that each member country was to retain all of the money that it collected. So if you prepaid a letter from the United States to another country, the U.S. kept the entire amount of postage that was paid. If you sent an unpaid from the U.S. to another country, the destination country, whatever they collected, they kept all the money. So there's no longer any accounting between member countries. Should underline that. So this was a great boon to the exchange of international mail, because prior to this, just about every postal convention that countries had between one another, there was a whole system of debits and credits that had to be marked on each particular letter, and required all kinds of postal agents, I guess we'd say, that were employed to do this very task. But once the GPU regulations were employed, that all went away. So I don't know if you can read this or not, but these are the 21 member countries on the left that were the original members, and to the right is the single weight letter rate for each of those countries. So in Austria, it was 10 kreuzer, Belgium, 25 centimes, Denmark, 20 lira, Egypt, 1.5 piastre. So you can see that whenever they were asked to come up with a standard GPU letter rate that was somewhat close to 25 centimes, you can see for a lot of these currencies, it may have been a little unusual for them. But let's see, I don't think there's anything that stands out. And you can see there for France, their single weight letter rate was 30 centimes, but there was a 10 centime maritime transit for any mail that went beyond their border for more than 300 nautical miles. And like I mentioned, the United States was the only country for which that applied. And the same was true with Italy. Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, we'll go ahead. So there's a typical example on the 1st of July, 1875. Ordinary letter rate for the United States to any GPU member was established at 5 cents per 1/2 ounce. And here's a typical letter, 1876, sent from the United States to Great Britain. There was 5-cent stamp on there with the New York Foreign Mail Council and just the New York circular date stamp in red. Those are the only markings that are on the letter. It's now being sent under the GPU. The entire amount of postage that was paid in New York was kept by the United States, no postage due when it arrived in England. Now we come to the part of unpaid or insufficiently prepaid correspondence. The general rule was that such items had to be stamped with a T marking, and basically that indicated to the foreign post office that a tax had to be paid on this letter. And let's see, that marking was to be applied by the member country of origin, or by the first country with which the letter entered the Union. We'll talk about that later. So here's a letter from the US to Great Britain. It was sent totally unpaid. And as I mentioned before, the rate on unpaid letters was twice the prepaid letter rate. Well, for Great Britain, the prepaid letter rate was 2.5 pence or 5 cents. And so this being unpaid, the total postage due is now twice that, or 5 pence. Okay. Initially, insufficiently prepaid letters were charged at the rate of totally unpaid letter of the same weight, less the amount of postage prepaid. Now, the value of the stamps applied to such letters expressed in centimes was indicated alongside the stamps. So here we see a single weight letter from the United States that used a 5-cent revenue stamp to pay the 5-cent UPU postage, GPU postage in this case. Well, that's right, I don't have a pointer here. Well, you can see that the US applied the T marking indicating that this was going to be a tax letter when it reached England. And right below the stamp, you can see a little zero. That's the amount of credit that this stamp was used for. Of course, as a revenue stamp, there was no value to it whatsoever. So we'd write zero down there. And on arrival in Great Britain, it was treated as an unpaid letter. So again, the total postage due was 5 pence. Now, here's an example of a letter from Great Britain to the United States, and it was prepaid 2.5 pence. The upper right kind of blotted out by the cancellation. It's 2.5 that, which normally would have paid the rate for a single weight letter. But you can see in the upper left corner is a manuscript 2 that indicated that this was a double weight letter. So now the British, underneath the stamp, applied a manuscript 25. This was the amount of insufficient postage on this letter. 2.5 pence was paid, but 2.5 pence was also owed because it was a double weight letter. 2.5 pence was equivalent to 25 centimes, and that's what's written there. And then on arrival in the US, postage due in the amount of 15 cents was collected. And that 15 cents was a combination of the total unpaid letter rate to the United States, which would have been 2 times 5 cents for a single weight letter, 2 times 10 cents for a double weight letter. That would have been 20 cents, but they gave credit for the 25 centime as mentioned underneath the stamp there, which was 5 cents. So the total postage due was 20 cents less the 5-cent credit for the prepayment. And so only 15 cents was collected on this letter. Okay, in April of 1879, the postage due on insufficiently prepaid letters was equal to twice the deficient postage. So before it was 2 times the postage less whatever was prepaid. In this case, it's just twice the deficient postage. So see, here we see another letter from the Great Britain to the United States, and it was prepaid 2.5 pence. And above that, the stamp just to the left, the British had marked another 25. This was, again, a double weight letter. You can see by the 2 in the upper left. And so the deficient postage was another 2.5 pence or 25 centimes. So when it got to New York now, the total postage due was 2 times the deficiency, which would have been 2 times 25 centimes or 50 centimes or 10 cents. Okay, let's go to the next one. Now we'll just see some typical letters. Here's a letter sent from the United States to Austria. Prepaid 5 cents, nothing special about it. Here's a letter coming the other way. Letter from Austria to the US. And that rate was 10 kreuzer per 15 grams. Another ordinary letter sent from the US to Denmark. 5 cents for 1/2 ounce was the GPU rate. A letter coming in the other direction from Denmark to the United States was prepaid at the 20 euro per 15 gram rate. Again, nothing particularly special about this. It just shows how the standard rates were between 2 member countries, how there was no credits, no debits, everything was hunky-dory. It was so much easier to exchange mails under these conditions. Okay, here's a letter from the United States to France. Again, 5 cents per 1/2 ounce. Below is a letter from France to the United States. Now, the French GPU postage was only 30 cents between member countries. But because the United States was more than 300 nautical miles from the French border, they imposed a 10 centime maritime fee. So the total postage due on a letter from France was 40 centimes, 30 centimes plus 10. Now, with regard to France, in 1878, they reduced their GPU letter rate to 25 centimes. So now the rate between France and the United States was 25 centimes plus the 10 centime maritime fee. And then in February of '79, France eliminated the maritime surcharge so that the GPU letter rate between France and the United States was just 25 centimes per 15 grams. So almost all the member countries, once they set their GPU rate, they rarely changed it, at least for quite a long time. But France, within the first couple of years, went from 30 centimes to 25 centimes, and then eventually they eliminated the maritime fee. So that's why the letters between the United States and France are a little different over the first couple of years. Let's see. All right, totally unpaid letters sent from the United States to France were charged 70 centimes. In the middle there is a blue 7, that's a French style for 7 decimes or 70 centimes. And this was, the rate here was a combination of 2 times the 30 centime unpaid letter rate. 30 centimes was a prepaid rate, but an unpaid letter was twice that. So 2 times 30. And again, they had to pay the 10-cent maritime fee. Then when went below, the letter below, when the rate was reduced to 25 centimes, then the total postage due was only 60 centimes or 6 decimes. All right, then in 1879, France eliminated the maritime surcharge. So now the postage due is just 2 times 25 centimes. And then on 1 April 1879, the postage due was equal. Now instead of was, this is insufficiently paid. The postage due was equal to twice the deficient postage. So here we see a letter from the United States. Should have been prepaid 5 cents, but it was only prepaid 3 cents. So the deficient postage was 2 cents or 10 centimes. And when it arrived in France, the postage due was 2 times the 10 centime deficit, or 20 centimes. So in the middle of that letter is a French style 2 for 2 decimes, or 20 centimes postage due. Okay, so totally unpaid letters sent from France to the US were charged 10 cents for 1/2 ounce, 2 times the 5-cent prepaid letter rate. And in April of 1879, the postage due was equal again to 2 times the unpaid letter rate. So what is that? 25 centime. It's hard for me even to see what it is. The 25 centime prepayment, which was basically 5 cents. But when it got to the US, the amount of postage due was 2 times the deficiency. So 5 cents, right? I can't read it. 5 cents postage due, sorry. It's hard for me to read from here. Okay, so that's basically the GPU rates and regulations for letters sent between 2 member countries. Now we're going to look at letters sent from the United States to non-member countries using a GPU country as an intermediary. So the postal relations of the union members with countries foreign to the union were regulated by separate conventions that existed at that time. So the rate between, the United States in this case, rate between the United States and a member country was 5 cents. If the letter was addressed to a country, to a non-member country beyond that, then someone in the United States had to pay whatever that charge was. So now we got a system of debits and credits again, but only for letters that were exchanged beyond the member countries. Okay. And each member country prepared a table, Table C, I have it listed here, that gave the postal charges on letters beyond that country. So if I sent a letter from the United States to England, and I wanted it to go to a destination beyond England that wasn't a member country, then I had to know how much postage, additional postage I would have to pay in order to send that letter beyond Great Britain. And that's what these lists, the Table Cs, actually showed. So on prepaid letters, the union country of origin retained the entire GPU portion of the prepayment, but had to credit the balance of the payment to the intermediary GPU country for all the fees that would take to carry this letter beyond the union. So in general, the charges of sending a letter from a union country to a destination beyond the union was equal to the rate that the citizen of that union country would pay for sending a letter of the same weight, less any internal postage. And that's the important part. So here we see an example of a letter sent to the United States to Brazil. Brazil wasn't a member of the country and it wasn't a member of the GPU initially. So prior to Brazil's entry into Union, the letter rate from the United States to Brazil via the British mail service was a combination of the 5 cents per 1/2 ounce GPU rate from the US to England, plus the letter rate from England to Brazil, all right, less the British inland portion included in that rate. So this is where it gets a little complicated. And here, as I mentioned here, in December 1875, the British letter rate to Brazil was established at 9 pence per 1/2 ounce. So if a resident in the United Kingdom wanted to send a letter, prepay a letter to Brazil, they would have had to pay 9 pence per 1/2 ounce. But this amount, the 9 pence per 1/2 ounce, was a combination of the 1 penny British internal fee plus the 8 pence maritime fee to Brazil. So the GPU regulations stated that if I wanted to send a letter to Brazil, I had to pay from the United States, I had to pay the 5 cents GPU letter rate, plus I had to pay the rate from the UK to that destination, beyond the Union. But it can't include the British internal rate. So the 5 cent prepayment that the United States made under the GPO actually included the British internal postage. So only the rate from Great Britain to Brazil, less the British internal postage, had to be paid by the US. I know it sounds complicated, but if you can see in this case that if the rate was 9 pence, the US only had to pay, in addition to the GPU letter rate to England, only had to pay 8 pence, okay? The 9 pence rate was if the letter originated in Great Britain and included the British internal fee. The US only had to pay 8 pence, which was the amount of postage required for the British to take this letter out of the Union to a foreign country. So maybe some more of those will sink in and be easier to explain. Okay, July of 1875, the British letter rate to India via the Brindisi route was 1 shilling per 1/2 ounce. But this amount, again, included the British internal postage. So the only beyond the Union portion was 11 pence. Okay, 1 shilling, 12 pence, less the British inland of 1 penny. So the US only had to pay the 5 cent GPU letter rate plus 11 pence or 22 cents, which was the amount of money to carry the letter from the UK to India via the Brindisi route. So the total postage prepayment on this was 27 cents, 5 cents plus the 22 beyond the Union rate that the British charged. And you can see in the lower left there, the 110, okay? So this was the amount in French centimes for the postage required for a letter beyond the Union. The 110 centimes was equal to 11 pence or 22 cents. So here we see a letter from the United States to Gabon on the west coast of Africa. And it was prepaid, looks like to 3 cents and 6 cents, so 15 cents. Must have been a coin collector that that canceled this letter because he blotted out everything. So now the British rate was 6 pence, but again, one penny of that was the British internal. So the US only had to pay the 5 cents GPU rate plus the 5 cents beyond the union rate, or a total of 10 cents. And that's what was prepaid, 15 cents in postage. And here you can see on the lower left, a New York date stamp with a 50 in it. That 50 represents the 50 centime credit to Great Britain that represented basically the 5 pence beyond the union rate that the British would charge. Okay, 1st of January of 1876, the British letter rate to the Seychelles was 6.5 pence. Again, that amount included the 1 penny for the British internal rate. So the only payment that was required, only additional payment that was required was the 5.5 pence or 11 cents rate from Great Britain to the Seychelles. And the 11 cents beyond the union rate plus the 5 cent GPU rate means that the letter rate from the US to the Seychelles at this time was 16 cents. And there we see a 10 and a 6 banknote issues. And on the lower left was the London paid marking, and underneath that, very difficult to see, was a 55. The first 5 is hidden by the London CDS. The second 5 you can see just to the upper right. And that was the US credit to Great Britain, 55 centimes or 11 cents. All right, now we'll take a look at some letters sent from non-member countries to the United States using a GPU country as an intermediary. So we looked at letters from the US to countries beyond GPU member. Now we're looking at letters sent from non-member countries to the US. The basic rates the basic rules were the same, and that the rates of postage chargeable for conveyance beyond the limits were determined by the conventions and added to the union rate. Again, each member country had to prepare, one of the GPU rules, had to prepare a list, a table, if you will, of the postal rates associated with sending mails into the union. On unpaid letters, the union country of destination retained the entire GPU portion of the prepayment, but credited the intermediary country with the fees associated with bringing that letter into the union. Was equal to, let's see, the charges bringing a letter into union was equal to the rate that a citizen of the union country would pay receiving that letter from the same weight, less any postage. So let's take a look. All right. Now in July 1875, the British rate associated with unpaid letters arriving from Uruguay was 1 shilling per half ounce. But this amount again included the British inland postage. So the cost of bringing a letter into the union was only 11 pence, right? 1 shilling minus the British inland postage of 1 penny was 11 pence or 110 centimes. So when this letter was sent from Uruguay, it was locally paid, but that meant nothing under the GPU regulations. That was just considered to be a totally unpaid letter. And it was bought by British Packet Service to England. And the British charged, he charged 110 centimes to bring this letter into the Union. So that on arrival in the United States, there was a collection of 32 cents in coin or 35 cents in depreciated currency. And that amount was a combination of the 2 times 5 cent unpaid GPU letter rate, as if the letter had originated from a member country, plus the 22 cent fee to England. So total postage due of 10 plus 22 was 32 cents in coin. But because of the depreciated currency at the time, the rate in currency would have been 35 cents. All right, here we see a letter from Brazil, okay, sent to the United States, sent totally unpaid to the United States, but this came by French service. Now, the French rate associated with unpaid letters from Brazil at this time was 1 franc for 15 grams. But again, this amount included the French inland postage, which was 25 centimes. So the only fee for bringing this letter into the Union, the only portion of that was 75 centimes. And you can see that marked the lower left, 7 and 5. That's the French way of writing a 5. So the 75 centime fee then on arrival in the United States had to be added to the U.S. internal postage for a GPU letter, which was 10 centimes, and 75 centimes was 15 cents. So the total postage due should have been 25 cents. But again, it's marked for 27 cents in depreciated currency. Or you could have paid 25 cents in coin, but nobody had coin then. Or if they did, they didn't want to spend it on letters, so it was easier to pay in currency. Okay, another category of mail were letters sent from GPU member countries to non-member countries using, in this case, the United States as an intermediary. Okay, so the rules are basically the same. The rates of postage chargeable for conveyance beyond the limits of the Union were determined by those conventions that were already established, in this case, already established with the United States. And these rates were spelled out in Table C as before. And prepaid letters, the Union country of origin retained the entire GPU portion and credited the balance to the intermediary. Sending a letter to a destination beyond the Union was equal to the rate that a U.S. citizen would have to pay for sending letters of the same weight. Same rules as before. Now, in this case, we have a letter from France to Cuba. Cuba was not yet a member of the GPU, and the U.S. on July of 1875 had established a 5 cent per 1/2 ounce rate on outgoing letters to countries with which the U.S. did not have a postal treaty when conveyed by vessels regularly employed to carry the mail. So the U.S. had no postal convention with Cuba at the time, but they did have a blanket rate of 5 cents per 1/2 ounce for any letter carried to a destination by U.S. steamships. And for accounting purposes, the U.S. internal rate at that time was 3 cents per 1/2 ounce. So the only beyond the Union fee that was charged by the U.S. was just 2 cents or 10 centimes. All right, so here we see a letter from France, a double weight letter, and it was prepaid 1 franc. And that amount was a combination of the French GPU letter rate to the United States, which was 2 times 40 centimes. It was 2 times 30 plus a 10 centime maritime fee. So 2 times 40 centimes to the US, plus 2 times the 10 centime beyond the Union fee. Okay. And so the credit that you see up there, just to the left of the stamps on the diagonal, says, in red, says 2O and a little c. So 20 cents was the credit that France had to pay the United States for the postage on taking the letter from the US out of the Union to Cuba. Now, on arrival in Cuba, an additional fee of 4 reals was required for the Cuban internal postage. Also, in July of 1875, the U.S. letter rate to Mexico by steamship service was 10 cents per 1/2 ounce. And these paid the letters only to the Mexican port of arrival. But again, the U.S. internal rate was 3 cents per 1/2 ounce. So the beyond the union fee charged by the U.S. was 7 cents. With Cuba, the fee beyond the United States was just 2 cents. With Mexico, the fee is 7 cents, or 5 times 7 is an additional 35 centimes. So here we see an 1878 letter from France to Mexico, and this was prepaid at the 75 centime rate. This amount was a combination of the 40 centime GPU letter rate to the US plus the 35 centime beyond the union fee. Okay, and here you can see on the left, you see the stamps 3 times 25 centime, that's a 75 centime rate. And to the left of the letter in red is a 3 and a 5, 35 centime. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the French writing of numerals, the first character is indeed a 3, and the second character is indeed a 5. So 35 centime credit to the United States, which was basically the 7-cent rate from the United States to Mexico. Okay. I think this is the last segment, letters sent from non-member countries to GPU member countries using the United States as an intermediary. All right. The same rules apply as we've seen before. Each member of the country each member of the GPU prepared a table C, listing the postal charges associated with sending letters beyond the union. Other than that, the rules were just the same as before. So here we see a letter, an unpaid letter from Cuba, all right, sent to the United Kingdom via the United States. Well, we already determined that the rate by Cuba at this time to the United States was 5 cents, but 3 cents of that was the U.S. internal postage. So only 2 cents was actually allowed to be debited against England for bringing this letter into the Union. And we can see the 10 in the upper right here. That's 2 cents or 10 centimes. And that is the US debit against England. So now on arrival in England, this was treated as a totally unpaid letter from Cuba. Totally unpaid letter from the US would have been 2 times, it would have been 2 times 2.5 pence or 5 pence. Added to that was the 10 centime or 1 penny fee. So the total postage due was 6 pence on this letter. So that was from Cuba. Now I see a similar letter from Mexico. This was a locally paid letter, which again meant nothing as far as the GPU regulations was concerned. It was still considered to be a totally unpaid letter. But as mentioned before, the rate of bringing a letter from Mexico into the Union was 10 cents less than 3 cents US internal, or 7 cents. And that 7 cents was equivalent to 35 centimes. Okay, so you can see that mark 35 centime debit in the center lower portion in blue manuscript. Now, when I got to England, again, considered a totally unpaid letter, which normally would have been just 5 pence, but now we have to add the 35 centimes or 3.5 pence. So the total postage due here was 8.5. And you can see that hand stamp, 8.5 D, 8.5 pence postage due on this letter. Combination being the amount of postage that it required to bring the letter into the Union, into the United States, plus the unpaid letter GPU fee. I think, oh, okay, here's here's a letter sent in 1876 from Mexico to France, again via the United States. Same thing, the 35-cent debit for bringing the letter from Mexico into the Union, into the United States. Now on arrival in France, the postage due was 2 times 30 centimes, okay, for basically an unpaid letter, plus the 10 centime maritime fee. Okay, so that would have been 70 centimes, plus the 35 centime fee to the US. So the total postage due was 1 franc, 5 centimes. If you're not used to looking at the French currency markings, it can be a little confusing, but you'll have to trust me on that one. Okay, and now this one, another letter from Mexico to France, but this was after France had reduced its GPU rate to 25 centimes per 15 grams, and it also had eliminated the maritime fee. So now the postage due in France was 2 times 25 centimes, 50 centimes, plus again the 35 centime fee for bringing the letter from Mexico into the Union. So the total postage due was 85 centimes. That should be on there somewhere. Yeah, okay. All right, so conclusions. I know you're all happy with this, but the intent of this presentation was to dispel some of the impressions that the study and the collection of postal history from the GPU period was anything other than boring. Now, you know, maybe some of the letters we showed up front were kind of straightforward, didn't look like much, but once you get into the exchange of letters with member and non-members countries, things get very interesting. And although this presentation dealt only with letters from the United States, similar studies could be or should be completed for other origins and destinations. And I say some of you, but I mean, I know we run into collectors and they think this material is easy to find. And I sit down and right away, I challenge them, so to speak, to come up just with basic paid and unpaid letters exchanged between the member countries. I understand that when you get to non-member countries, things get a little different, a little complicated, but just mail between member countries. You'd think that would be easy to put together. If I were to start it now, I would never make it because I'd run out. My lifespan would be way too short for that to happen. I can tell you that what I thought was going to be one of the easiest covers to find, a totally unpaid letter between the United States and Great Britain. I mean, of all correspondence, you would think that would be the easiest to find. Totally unpaid letter. Took me nearly 4 years to find, and I've only seen one example since then. Now there's plenty of insufficiently paid letters between the United States, but totally unpaid. I don't know why. I think people got in their mind, you know, I'm going to pay this. It's only 5 cents. I'm going to pay it. You know, save the guy on the other end some money. He had to pay basically 10 cents when he collected. So 5 cents. You know, I'll just pay it. And you know, so for me to find a totally unpaid letter from there was incredible. I searched a long time, and the other thing is that a lot of these letters, they look simple, and because they look simple, they never appear as, you know, single letters in an auction, right? I mean, they just don't look like much. So you really have to search through dealers' boxes, or, you know, go online or whatever, and try to find examples if you can. But for those of you that think it's easy, I give you that challenge, and hopefully you can. Hopefully you'll be more successful than I was. Anyhow, thank you for your attention.
A follow-up question for something you just said. How many letters have you seen that have been accurately paid to get to their destination where they've put all the postage on correctly?
Yeah, well, even though I showed the ones that went beyond the union, all those were correctly paid. Even the ones from the Seychelles, all the ones from Brazil. It's just that they had rates that were much beyond what the general postal union rate was.
Right, but okay, so I guess one of my questions related to this is, are these letters going through particular post offices, London, Liverpool, Central, or are local postmasters trying to figure this out when you come into the office and say, I need to get this letter to the Seychelles? Is the Somerset postmaster looking at this thinking, I can't help you, or are they going to the main locations, central locations that with training?
No. Under the GPU regulations, each country was supposed to establish these lists, this table C. I don't show any here. I've got something on my briefcase, a table C's from the United States, table C's from France, and so on. You can take a look. And once those tables and lists were established, they were sent to postmasters all over the country. Now, I admit that probably most of the letters that you see here went through established exchange offices in the United States. So Boston, New York, Philadelphia, you know. But even the local postmasters were supposed to have, and I can't tell you whether the U.S. Post Office Assistant, U.S. Mails and Post Office Assistant, which every post office in the United States was supposed to have reference to. I'm not sure that these table Cs were actually printed in there, but I think they were supposed to get the table C, so that when I'm into a local post office and you said, I want to send a letter to Brazil, and they said, well, it's going to cost you, 27 cents or whatever, if you want to do that. So they had the knowledge. And
It just seemed like so many of them had deficiencies and credits and so forth.
I can't say they applied the knowledge. No, just because they had the table, and especially when the GPU first went in, because you went in there last week, it would have cost you, 38 cents to send a letter somewhere. And now it's 5 cents plus whatever it is. And then, so you see a lot of that, but eventually I think they got it worked out.